Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Just sit up, don't fall. I got it. 2 candy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Wait for the ambulance.
You want to hold on to
I'm
me?
going to hold you. You're going to wait for the ambulance.
I didn't smoke.
Yeah.
You don't know what's wrong? You don't know what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I mean,
You don't know what's wrong with you?
I do. I'm just cold.
What's going on, everybody? This is the Snowstorm, man. I'm like,
If you're stuck on the street during a snowstorm, survival isn't measured in days, it's measured in hours. In 2025, a major snowstorm hit Kensington, Philadelphia, a place already overwhelmed by addiction and homelessness. As the city slowed down, the crisis didn't. What happened during those frozen nights exposes a reality most Americans never see. When the city slows down, the street doesn't. When the snowstorm hit Kensington, Philadelphia, the city responded the way it always does during extreme weather. Offices closed, traffic thinned, and emergency priorities shifted to roads, downed lines, and infrastructure. The city moved into storm mode. But on the sidewalks, nothing changed. Snow gathered along the curb, wind pushed it into corners and doorways, and people who were already outside stayed outside. On one block, a figure remained motionless under a thin blanket as the snow built up around them like insulation that couldn't warm anything. And that night, no outreach van came through that corner. The street felt quieter, but not safer. Quieter often means fewer witnesses, fewer interruptions, and longer stretches of isolation. People who were already living outside remained where they were not because it was safe, but because shelters were full, access was limited, and moving through freezing conditions carried its own risks. For those dependent on fentanyl, staying put can feel less dangerous than withdrawal, even as temperatures drop to levels the body can't negotiate with. During storms, the danger doesn't disappear, it concentrates. And as the night went on and the streets grew still, it became clear that this wasn't a special emergency moment. It was the same crisis, under extreme conditions. And as I kept walking, the next question became unavoidable. Why would anyone stay out here when the cold is this unforgiving?
are you warm or not? No? Are you warm?
Cold. I'm going to try to get on the bus.
Okay. That's good then. The train is better, don't you think?
Yeah, that was getting on there.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Why many people stay on the street, even during a snowstorm from the outside? It sounds like a simple question. If shelters exist, why don't people go inside when a storm hits? But walking through Kensington during the snowstorm made it clear the answer isn't simple at all. Some shelters were already full long before the first snow fell. Others required people to arrive hours earlier, line up in freezing temperatures, and wait without knowing if they'd get a bed. Some policies forced separation from partners or pets, and for people who have already lost almost everything, that one condition can feel like losing the last remaining piece of their life. Even belongings become a barrier. When you live outside, your bag is your history: IDs, a coat, medication, a phone charger, maybe a photo. Leaving it behind can mean losing it forever. For someone already exhausted, sick, or withdrawing, the process can feel impossible. On one block, a man sat awake on cardboard, rubbing his hands together until they turned red, explaining quietly that he'd been turned away the night before and didn't have the strength to try again. There's also fear. Fear of overcrowded spaces, theft, conflict, being forced out early in the morning, or being surrounded by strangers when you're already traumatized. In winter, panic can be as dangerous as cold. For people dependent on fentanyl, withdrawal symptoms can be severe: nausea, shaking, anxiety, pain, and the idea of going somewhere they can't manage that discomfort often feels more dangerous than staying outside. Over time, many learn to rely on routines they can control, even if those routines are harmful. The snowstorm didn't change these realities, it amplified them. And a few blocks ahead, I began to see what happens when those fragile safety nets fail completely, when the street becomes the only option left. How fentanyl changes survival in extreme cold is dangerous for anyone, but on the streets of Kensington during the snowstorm, fentanyl changed the rules of survival entirely. In freezing temperatures, the body depends on pain signals, shivering, and discomfort to stay alive. Those signals force movement, wakefulness, and the instinct to seek warmth. Fentanyl dulls those signals. People don't always feel how cold they are, how wet their clothes have become, or how long they've been still. On one sidewalk, a woman sat slumped against a storefront.
Huh?
What'd you say?
I'm not are you okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm alright.
Okay, yeah, okay. I thought you were sleeping or something.
No, I'm wide awake.
Oh, okay. That's
Eyes half open, snow collecting on her shoulders. She wasn't reacting the way a person usually reacts to cold, not shifting, not standing, not even checking her hands. She looked like someone drifting, while winter worked quietly in the background. Cold exposure can slow breathing and heart rate. Fentanyl can do the same. Together, they compound each other. A person who might have survived the night without drugs can slip into a medical emergency much faster when fentanyl is involved. Outreach workers explained that in winter, distress becomes harder to detect. Shallow breathing, pale skin, unresponsiveness, these can look like hypothermia, exhaustion, or sedation. In low light, in silence, the difference can be missed until it's too late. The storm also disrupted normal rhythms. Fewer people were outside, fewer eyes were watching, and fewer chances existed for someone to notice trouble and intervene. In warmer months, movement and noise create accidental safety. In winter, silence takes over. Fentanyl thrives in that silence, not because it's wanted, but because it removes the body's alarms while the environment becomes lethal. What became clear walking through Kensington was that this wasn't reckless behavior or indifference to life. It was chemistry colliding with environment inside a system that offers very little margin for error. And as the night deepened, the most dangerous hours weren't behind us, they were just beginning. Nightfall in Kensington. When the risk peaks as daylight faded during the storm, Kensington changed in ways that weren't immediately visible, but were deeply felt. The temperature dropped fast, and with it came a different kind of quiet: fewer cars, fewer pedestrians, fewer chances for help to arrive by accident. Streetlights reflected off the snow and made the sidewalks look almost clean, almost calm, like a scene that could fool you if you didn't stop and look closely. Under awnings, in doorways, along walls, people tried to sleep in positions that reduced wind exposure, pulling jackets tight, layering whatever they had. On one block, a man kept stamping his feet and shifting his weight every few minutes, forcing himself to stay awake. Not because he wanted to, but because he knew that falling fully asleep could mean not waking up at all. Night, is when margins disappear. Outreach thins out. Emergency responses slow. And people already struggling are left to manage on their own. For those using fentanyl, the danger increases sharply after dark. Cold and exhaustion can lower tolerance, while isolation means fewer witnesses if something goes wrong. Even when someone notices a person in distress, hesitation can steal time. Are they sleeping? Are they sick? Are they okay? In freezing conditions, uncertainty can be fatal. What stood out most wasn't chaos. It was endurance. People doing whatever they could to make it through a few more hours. Nightfall didn't bring relief. It concentrated every risk the storm created. And just before dawn, as the snow began to slow, the consequences of that long night started to surface. After the storm, what the morning reveals by morning, the snowstorm had begun to loosen its grip on Kensington. But the streets told a different story. Snow was packed down into gray slush. Blankets were stiff with ice. People who had stayed awake all night slowly began to move again, testing circulation, flexing fingers, rubbing hands together. Some looked disoriented, like they'd been fighting the night instead of sleeping through it. Others didn't move at all, at least not right away. On one corner, a small group stood quietly at a distance while someone checked on a man who hadn't responded when the sun came up.
Hey bro, you good? Are you okay, man? How you doing? Coffee? Huh? Dollar? Alright, I'll just give you $1, bro.
Morning doesn't arrive all at once here. It comes in fragments, shaped by uncertainty and hesitation. This is the moment most people never see. News cameras focus on the storm while it's happening, but the real impact shows itself after. Emergency services return to normal schedules, traffic picks up, and the city resumes its routine. For those living on the street, there is no reset. The night leaves marks on bodies, on health, and sometimes in ways that can't be reversed. Outreach workers move through the area, trying to identify who needs urgent medical attention, who needs transport, and who is simply trying to stand up without falling. Each interaction feels careful and measured, restrained by how many needs remain unmet. What became clear in daylight was that survival during the storm didn't mean safety afterward. The crisis hadn't passed, it had simply changed shape. And as the neighborhood returned to its normal pace, one question kept returning. What happens to the people who survived the storm once the attention moves on? Why Kensington is not an exception as the streets returned to their usual rhythm, it became harder to ignore a larger truth. What happened in Kensington wasn't unusual. Similar scenes play out in cities across the United States, often without snow, often without cameras. The combination of rising housing costs, limited mental health care, has created conditions where a single disruption, weather, illness, missed outreach can become life-threatening. Kensington feels extreme not because it is unique, but because everything is visible here, compressed into a few blocks. What makes fentanyl different from past drug waves is how little margin for error it allows. Small shifts in tolerance, health, or environment can turn a close call into tragedy. Cold weather amplifies risk, but the underlying danger exists year-round. In conversations with outreach workers, the same pattern comes up again and again. People cycle through the same spaces, the same emergencies, the same near misses, while long-term solutions remain out of reach. On one street, a man pointed to where he slept the night of the storm and said quietly that he knew people in other states dealing with the same thing. The same instability, the same grief, the same constant survival math. This isn't a failure of individual will. It's a system stretched thin across housing, healthcare, and addiction support, leaving people exposed at the worst possible moments. And once you understand this isn't confined to one neighborhood, the question becomes more uncomfortable. What happens when the next crisis hits somewhere else? When the cameras leave, the crisis remains as attention fades and daily life resumes. The conditions that shaped the storm's impact remain firmly in place. Sidewalks clear. Traffic returns. The urgency that briefly surrounded Kensington dissolves into routine. For people living on the street, nothing meaningfully changes. The same gaps in shelter capacity, medical care, and addiction treatment still exist, only now without the temporary spotlight that extreme weather brings. In conversations after the snow melted, outreach workers described a familiar pattern: brief surges of concern followed by long stretches of neglect. Resources arrive late, stay briefly, and leave before stability can take hold. People who survived the cold are often weaker, sicker, and more vulnerable than before. Frostbite, respiratory illness, and untreated withdrawal don't resolve on their own, and for someone without stability, every medical problem becomes harder to treat. On one block, a woman who made it through the storm was back in the same doorway days later, wrapped in the same blanket, facing the same risks, only now without weather headlines or emergency framing. This is where the real challenge sits. Crisis moments force visibility, but sustained change requires attention when nothing dramatic is happening. Kensington doesn't need another storm to prove something is wrong. It needs systems that function before the next disaster arrives. And standing there days later, watching life move on, I realized the most important part of this story hadn't happened yet. The people who are still there days after the snowstorm, Kensington no longer looked like a crisis zone to anyone passing through quickly. The snow was gone. Sidewalks were wet instead of frozen. The city had moved on. But the people who were there during the storm were still there afterward, carrying its effects quietly. Some walked slower. Some coughed harder. Some avoided putting weight on hands or feet that never fully warmed back up. Survival didn't mean recovery. It meant continuing under worse conditions than before. What stood out most was how familiar everything felt to the people living there. The storm was dramatic, but it wasn't shocking to them. Many spoke about it the same way they talked about past winters, past overdoses, past close calls, as another chapter in a long season of endurance. One man pointed to a doorway where he stayed warm enough to make it through the night and said he'd lost track of how many winters he'd done this. For him, the storm wasn't a turning point. It was another entry in a list of things survived. This is where the gap between public perception and lived reality becomes clear. Viewers see a crisis moment. People on the street experience continuity. Help appears briefly, then recedes, while the daily struggle remains. What lingered most wasn't chaos. It was persistence, lives continuing under pressure, largely unseen, waiting for something to be different. And the longer I listened, the clearer one question became. What would it actually take for this cycle to break?
Oh yeah, yes. Would you like coffee? All right.
Hey, can you call 911 for me?
Oh yeah.
Call the ambulance.
Oh yeah, be careful.
What real change would have to look like after spending time on these streets, it became clear that change isn't one action or one program. It's a sequence that has to work together. Emergency shelters matter, but they can't be the final answer if people are sent back outside every morning. Outreach matters, but it loses power when follow-up care isn't available. Treatment matters, but it can't function in isolation from housing, mental health support, and basic stability. On one afternoon after the storm, I watched an outreach worker explain options to someone who was listening carefully, not because help was guaranteed, but because it was rare to be offered more than once. What's missing most isn't awareness, it's continuity. People need places where they can stay, recover, and rebuild without constantly resetting to zero. Without that, even the best intentions stall out, and people fall through the gaps repeatedly, sometimes until there's nothing left to catch them. This isn't about quick fixes or dramatic interventions. It's about whether support arrives early enough and stays long enough to matter. The question isn't whether solutions exist, it's whether they're allowed to connect in the real world, where lives are already hanging by a thread. And as I prepared to leave Kensington, one final realization stayed with me. This story doesn't end on these streets. What this story asks of the rest of us leaving Kensington didn't feel like closure. It felt unfinished. The streets looked ordinary again, but the conditions that nearly turned a snowstorm into a death sentence were still there, unchanged. What stayed with me wasn't just what I saw, but how easily it could fade once distance returned. This crisis doesn't announce itself most days. It exists quietly, shaped by routine, scarcity, and a level of risk that has become normalized. It's easy to think of homelessness and addiction as problems that belong to certain neighborhoods, certain cities, certain people. But what the storm revealed is how fragile the line really is. A missed paycheck, an untreated injury, a prescription that turns into dependence, a mental health spiral with nowhere to land, a system that fails to catch someone early. These aren't rare events, they're common, and they stack quickly. Kensington isn't a warning because it's extreme, it's a warning because it's familiar. Understanding this doesn't require outrage or pity. It requires attention, the kind that lasts after emergencies pass. The people still living on these streets don't need to be treated as symbols or statistics. They need stability, consistency, and systems that don't disappear once the moment stops being dramatic. This story isn't about one storm or one neighborhood. It's about what happens when survival depends on being noticed in time, and how often that notice never comes. And once you truly see that, the question isn't what happened in Kensington, it's whether we'll recognize this pattern somewhere else before it's too late. If you watched this all the way through, thank you, not for the views, but for staying present with a story that's easy to ignore and hard to sit with. These videos aren't made for shock or entertainment, they're made to document what's happening on the ground, in real places, to real people. If this helped you understand something you hadn't seen before, consider liking the video. It helps this work reach people who might never search for it on their own. Sharing it matters even more, because awareness doesn't spread by accident, and silence is one of the reasons these crises continue unseen. And if you want to keep following on-the-ground documentary reporting like this, stories focused on reality, not headlines, consider subscribing to the channel. More videos are coming, and they go deeper into places and situations most cameras never stay long enough to understand. Thanks for watching, and thanks for caring long enough to listen.